When we arrived home, we of course discussed everything that had transpired. We realized the medium only knew our surnames. She did not know in which part of London we lived, so she could not possibly have found out anything about our private affairs. If telepathy was the method she used, we considered it would have been a really clever performance. To draw from our subconscious mind's information, some of which we had forgotten, and then reproduce so many different voices was worthy of the highest paid vaudeville artist. And the medium who charged 5 shillings only for each sitter would certainly have been wasting her time. No, we really felt that this might be genuine. We eagerly awaited the next sitting with Mrs. Lee, which we booked for 2 weeks ahead. We were very anxious to know if, at the next meeting, my own parents would come through, and if the evidence would be as clear as it had been at the first sitting. The second sitting took place under similar conditions to the first one, with the exception that 2 of the sitters were missing and had been replaced by 2 new ones. This time we were introduced to the medium just before the circle opened, and we found that she was a quiet type of young woman. She told us that she was the wife of an Australian farmer who was now a hairdresser in London. She also told us that a few years earlier she realized that she was becoming a medium, as, when sitting quietly, she frequently felt that she could go into a trance. She was told through other mediums that, if she allowed herself to go into deep trance, she would soon become a physical medium through whom the spirits on the other side would be able to speak. The second circle started as previously, and after Miraphras, the control, had greeted us all, the trumpet came straight to me and tapped me on the knee. Then a very loud voice said it was my father speaking. The voice was so loud that the words were slightly distorted, although some of the intonations were recognizable as my father's. He stopped after a few moments and said, "I must apologize for shouting. You know, I'm not accustomed to this newfangled method of speaking." He then lowered his voice, and without any imagination it appeared to us that my father was actually speaking to us. Self: "Are you now free of pain?" Dad: "Yes. I suffered a lot before I passed on, as you know, but that is all done with now. When I came over, I was taken to a place of rest, where I was kept for about 2 weeks. I saw that I was only one of hundreds in this hall, which you would liken to a sanatorium, except the surroundings were far more beautiful and colourful. There was such a restful and peaceful atmosphere round about us, and with the wonderful help given to us by the healers, I soon became accustomed to the new conditions here. As I began to realize that I was not waiting for Resurrection Day, and that all our previous beliefs were entirely confounded, I shed all my earthly aches and pains. It is wonderful over here, and I must describe the unbelievable beauty to be found on this side. You cannot possibly visualize the beauties of these spheres, with its gorgeous flowers which are ever blooming and with such sweet perfumes. The scenes of happiness all around us, beautiful white and colored structures, and the unbelievable color effects, the placid lagoons, the luscious green meadows, and the beautiful colorings of the bird life, and enveloping it all the peaceful calm and happy atmosphere. These spheres are graduated according to a soul's progress, how much one believed in the power of love, and how genuine was the wish to do good to one's fellow men. The lower spheres are inhabited by those who live for success only, without any thought for how that success has been achieved, for those who wished evil and nursed hatreds in their heart, without any understanding of mankind's weaknesses. The higher you go, the more magnificent becomes the condition in which the soul lives, where the light is so powerful that it would blind those living on a lower sphere. When souls first arrive on this side, they have the same features as during their earthly life, but after a while they become different, their inner goodness influencing their exterior appearance, and they gravitate towards those of their own spiritual standing and affinities. Then followed a long conversation of a more intimate nature between my father, my wife, and me. Details of this conversation made it appear possible to us that he could be my father, but we required much more proof than that. Self: "How are you spending your time now?" Dad: "Please do not think we waste our time. We are very busy people. Apart from attending halls of learning on any subject that appeals to us, we often help those coming over to realize where they are and give them all the assistance possible. Self. Have you a choice, or must you study certain subjects which are chosen for you? Dad. On earth we all had free will, and we retain that free will when we come over here. If I had the ambition to study science, the most wonderful laboratories would be open to me, and the most eminent scientists are available as instructors. The same thing applies to every other branch of knowledge. You would hardly believe how perfectly these laboratories are fitted out with rows and rows of workbenches on which stand every possible appliance for experimental work. Many of these appliances have already been duplicated on the Earth, but in addition we have paraphernalia so far advanced that scientists on Earth would not at the present time be able to understand their usage. This knowledge will eventually be given to them. Actually, I have been patiently waiting to contact you. My work will be to help you and your dear family with your material affairs, as there is a deal of psychic work in front of you both. We are anxious to keep your affairs in good order, so that you will be free for this work. After that, I shall be able to leave you in the capable hands of your guides, and I shall start to make progress. Our object, as far as I can see, is to learn as much as possible and obtain the maximum experience, with the object of progressing through the etheric plane that I am now on. From there we progress to higher planes. With my limited knowledge, I do not know what the ultimate aim is, but I have the feeling that it will be revealed to us when we are ready for it. This sounded quite feasible to us, and we have had this confirmed many times through mediums over a number of years. Dad. Your mother is making good progress already. You know what a good woman she was, or I should say still is. She is very excitedly waiting to speak to you both, but you must not expect her to come to you as often as I will. Self. Isn't this unselfish attention which you propose to pay us going to interfere with your progress? Dad. What are a few years? I can always go ahead when I've looked after all of you to my satisfaction. For this we expressed our grateful thanks. The trumpet then flashed through the air to a position about 3 feet away, and as it moved my father said, "Come along, Ma." This time we both gasped, because the manner in which these few words were spoken was so typical of my father, that even to this day I remember the feeling I had when I heard him. Since then, of course, we have spoken to him many times, that his voice and mannerisms have returned so much to normal that we just take him for granted. My mother then spoke to us, and with love in her voice said, "I am so delighted to be able to speak to you. At your first sitting, I called out to you, but you did not answer. I am happy to know that you have been sufficiently open-minded to investigate the truth of survival. Mind you, children, I am most surprised myself. I was always taught that when we were dead, and the body buried, we would have to stay there till the trumpet sounded. I always felt that this was foolish, but I never realized that our souls would be able to leave the body and live here under such beautiful conditions, and that we can still live a useful life. Oh, there are such wonderful things to look forward to, with no material worries and no bodily suffering to mar our happiness." My wife. We are so happy to be able to speak to you, and that you have found time to come to this circle. This is beginning to make us feel that we are actually speaking to you all, but it certainly takes a lot of getting used to. It is such a wonderful thing to actually hear your voice again. Tell me, what is the position regarding relationship to each other on the other side? Ma. Some of you on your side have the idea that family relationships continue in exactly the same way as whilst we are on earth. On the other hand, others have the totally opposite view. In actual fact, both views are correct. For instance, if a man and his wife are very close to each other whilst on earth, they will continue to be so when they join each other on our side of life. But it does not follow that this relationship will continue indefinitely in this way. It is quite possible that either one of them may have an affinity with another soul, where the bond between them is much stronger than the one existing between man and wife. This affinity will be easily recognized, and these two souls will gradually break away from their loved ones and join their affinities. This also applies to children who may find that, whilst they were extremely fond of their parents, brothers and sisters, this bond of affection becomes weaker when they come over, and their interests change. This frequently happens because, if we believe in the law of reincarnation, those children may have only chosen their parents to give them the earthly surroundings and conditions which they needed during their earthly lifespan. This sounded reasonable to us, but we still kept an open mind and tried to understand how the second demonstration could have taken place. Whether it could have been by mind reading or from information gleaned from us during the 2 sittings, or some other way beyond our comprehension. Firstly, we were absolutely certain that not one of these sitters or the medium knew who we were or where we came from, and again we could not believe that we had given anyone a lead from which they could pick up details of our family. We still felt that if we had been hoodwinked, it was not worth the medium's time for a few shillings she received. Now, in the later years, when we have had so much proof that it is all true, we feel slightly amused that we could have doubted. However, we felt a little better when we remembered the words our guides had spoken to us from time to time. Probe, test, examine, and analyze everything you see and hear. Take nothing for granted, and if you have the slightest doubt about anything, even what we say to you, do not accept it until you are perfectly satisfied. Intending to investigate every form of mediumship, we visited a man in the West End of London who claimed that he gave clairvoyant messages by sand divining. This was a considerable time before Nefertiti mentioned the eternal triangle. We were shown into a room furnished in an oriental fashion, and on a low table we saw a large tray of sand. The medium sat on one side of the table, and we sat facing him. He moved the sand around with his hand and started to tell us names of some of our spirit people on the other side, and also gave us descriptions, most of which we were able to accept. He said to us both, "I see the eternal triangle in your lives." After which remark we began to grow impatient, as we felt that this could not possibly apply to us. The medium, seeing our faces, tried to assure us that it was not a frivolous remark, but that we should hear more about it later. There was a sequel to this, however, which I referred to earlier on. We had never before heard of sand divining being used as a form of mediumship in this part of the world, and have never encountered another such medium since. Of course, we have read of many sand diviners in the Middle East, whose mediumship is of a very high standard, and their probing into the past is uncannily correct. We then decided it was time to visit a trance medium, and made an appointment with one in South London, whose reputation we had heard about. Shortly after we settled down, the medium started the first stages of trance. Whilst doing so, to our surprise, she got up from her chair and did a war dance round the room for a few minutes like a Red Indian. When she returned to her chair, we saw that she was actually in trance. Then a very deep voice through the lips of the medium explained that he was the control. My wife: "Why the war dance?" The guide: "I was a Red Indian when on earth, and I like to do this little dance when I am about to take control of the medium. It helps conditions." He said he was pleased to be able to talk to us and was anxious to help us with our inquiries. The guide to my wife: "Your father is here." He then gave her a perfect description of her father, build, height, colouring, and several mannerisms which were easily recognized. My wife: "That certainly seems like my father." The guide: "It certainly is your father. He told me so. Why should he say so if it were not? I see him with a blue sash and blue apron. It looks like some regalia. Was he a Freemason?" My wife: "Yes, that is quite correct. My father devoted a lot of his time to Freemasonry, and he had held high honours. Could you ask my father if he could submit some proof of his existence on the other side, which I can pass on to my brother? This brother wants to believe in survival, and any evidence my father could produce for him would help him." The guide: "Your father says that your brother must seek for himself, and not leave it to others to do it for him. He also asked me to tell you that this knowledge is too wonderful to be treated lightly, and your brother must put himself out a little and find out things for himself." The guide then conveyed several more intimate messages to my wife, with proof of her father's presence, which was most evidential. He surprised us greatly when he said, Your father tells me he likes your new upholstery covers in your living room. Self. Please ask him how he knows about them. The guide. Your father says, why not? I'm continually in your home and was there when the covers were changed. He says, I noticed something else. Have you examined the triple photograph of your children which stands on your radio? We said together, no. What is there special about it? The guide. Well, your father tells me that the center photograph is about 1/8 of an inch higher than the side panels. Self. We were not aware of that, but we will examine the photograph when we arrive home. When we returned to our flat, the first thing we did was to look at the photograph frame on the radio, and to our utter amazement we found that he was correct. The center panel was about 1/8 of an inch higher than the side panels. We began to wonder how many of our people from the other side of life visited us in our home, or how the medium that evening could possibly have used telepathy, as the fault in the photograph frame was something we had never noticed. People are inclined to scoff at some of the messages which come through from the other side, considering that they are of little importance. They do not realize, however, that it is the small intimate details known only to the sitters and the spirit communicators which are the most evidential. Once the sitters are convinced that they are actually contacting the spirit world, those unimportant messages cease, and if they wish for more knowledge, the higher teachings follow without fail.